Hello, I'd like to introduce you to Retail 100 Consultancy. We are a consultancy with a difference. Founded on over 100 years of experience, the four of us worked principally at John Lewis and have therefore covered every category you can think of that a department store sells. We are absolutely passionate about working collaboratively with our clients to build their businesses in a really sustainable way. My name is Anna Berry and I worked at John Lewis for 33 years. In that time, I did 22 roles, everything from buying categories from beauty to fashion to home, to running supplier and commercial management, and then as head of buying for Gifts, Cook and Dine. That's where I met Sara Allbright, who was one of the most stunning buyers that I'd ever worked with. I'd like to introduce Sara now.
Thank you, Anna. That's very kind. I spent 18 years working as a buyer at John Lewis. Most of that time was spent on seasonal categories, so anything from gifting and home fragrance to Christmas and gift food. So lots of excitement, lots of new product, and always kind of seasonal peaks and ups and downs to manage. So today, talking to you about sourcing, the first part is where to start. So it's really important to know what to consider before you start an overseas sourcing journey, thinking about how to plan your sourcing routes and what comes from where. So as with many things, making a plan is really key. So start off with thinking about what it is you're actually looking to buy and how have you come to that decision. So are you working in a retail environment where you've seen branded products of a certain type selling really well? Do you feel like you have a gap in your assortment for a certain type of product? And knowing therefore what you're going to look for from your producers and factories. Then thinking about how many units you'll be able to sell and also buy at the end of the day. So it's really important to look at your sales history on similar product and understand what capacity you have to clear volumes of maybe a couple of hundred up to thousands. And also thinking about the implications of that in terms of how much storage you'll need. So when it comes down to your responsibility to buy all this product, it most likely will turn up all at one time. So do you have enough room in your stock room? Do you have extra warehousing? And making sure you'll be able to have the capacity to deal with that. Once you've understood all of those things and you feel confident that you're in a good place to proceed, creating a clear brief is really key. So are you going to be designing a bespoke product yourself? Are you going to be working with the factory to do this? Are you just looking to buy something off the shelf? So being really clear on what that product is and what you want it to look like. Then working out what sort of cost price you need to achieve. So again, really clear to be open and honest about this so that a factory can understand whether they're going to be able to achieve for you what you need, rather than spending lots of time working on a wonderful product that you will then discover is about 4 times as expensive as you need it to be. And then when do you want the stock? So for instance, if you're looking to develop a range for Christmas, have you put enough time in to be able to get that there in time for Christmas? So for instance, don't start looking at it in August if you want it in October. You'll probably be looking at October the following year. And the really key part of understanding all of that and making sure you've got it correct is plotting your timeline of development, negotiation and shipping into a critical path document. And there's lots of ways to have a critical path. For some people, these are very formal documents in Excel. For others, they might just be a list. But making sure everyone knows what needs to happen and when is really important to make sure your sourcing happens on time and in a way that you were expecting. And then thinking about what comes from where and how to find it. So using shows such as Source, which covers fashion, home and gift and garden, are great places to start your research, and are really important in terms of starting to build a relationship. So it's not often, especially when you're working with further away sources, that you'll be able to spend time with people and the elements of working with producers and factories. So thinking about what you want to ask them, all the questions you need to know about how they work, how they source, what they can produce for you, are much easier done in person when you're stood there with them and when you're stood there also with some of their products. So really make sure you factor in enough time to spend at the shows, walking the aisles and getting used to what kind of different products come from those countries and those zones as you're walking the halls. There are lots of other things also to consider, so some which may seem more obvious. So looking on products just for the made in label or the made in sticker. If you've got a brand or a retailer that you aspire to and you like their products or you like the materials they use, this will give you a really good hint of where to start. And then, as with anything, looking on the internet, so using search engines, you'll find a lot of information, but also, again, directly on retailers and brands' websites. Lots of retailers are very open and honest about their sourcing routes and the factories they use, so she'll really give you some great tips and hints of where to go. Then a networking element of something like LinkedIn, again, through different networks. If you post about what you're looking for, what you're trying to find, you'll no doubt get someone who connects you to someone that will likely be able to help you, and a really great place to look for factory connections. And then people are really open to peer-to-peer support, and there's also some really interesting ways that that's being done. So through Instagram as such, on accounts like Life of a Buyer and Life of a Merchandiser, there'll often be posts from people looking for specific manufacturers or specific factories, or likewise those factories and manufacturers advertising themselves. So make sure you're kind of looking at all options and all places to go to find the best factories and routes for your sourcing.
So in your sourcing strategy, there are a number of considerations, and the big debate at the moment is where you source from. So is it far shore or near shore? And this has been exacerbated by COVID, where things got really difficult, and container fills became very expensive. So for example, the average container, a 20-foot container would normally cost about $6,000, went up to $22,000. So this really impacted people's ability, to source from a far country, but also the cost of it was prohibitive, and actually physically getting the stock into the country during COVID was very, very difficult. So the answer is probably a blend of both, and it really depends on the categories that you're working in. So for example, if you're working in high fashion, you are likely to have a sourcing strategy where you have the ability to be able to react to sales so quite quickly. So you may, for example, buy your core denim, for example, in somewhere like China or Bangladesh, where they can produce it at a really high volume and a great margin. But where you have more fashionable denim items like denim jackets or denim dresses, you tend to find that the fashion retailers, particularly the fast fashion retailers, will source those from a country like Turkey or Morocco, because if their sales are really strong, they can then react in season. The benefit of that is that you're not buying the same minimum order quantities or MOQs from a big factory from a far shore. So working out your sourcing strategy will depend on what your product proposition is, and different sources will be right for different products. China is known as the factory of the world, and clearly China is one of the biggest drivers of sourcing into the UK. But it is about buying huge volumes, and it is about going for margin. It's also very difficult to do. If you're a small supplier and you don't have the contacts, it's a difficult country to visit. So the choice would be to get a supplier or an agent to help you in China. But it has amazing quality products. It's just a question of whether it suits your strategy, and it may suit your strategy on one part of your assortment, but not on others. It's also brilliant, clearly, at homewares as well, so not just fashion. In terms of not being dependent on one source, I think we all learned that during COVID. So working out what is right for your business. So you might continue to source in China, but then these new countries that are coming on stream in Europe, I mean, Turkey has got free trade, so that has been really, really profitable for people to source from Turkey. It's very good at high fashion. It's amazing at premium organic cotton. The same with Portugal. So we would have sourced quite a lot in both homewares and fashion from Portugal, where you're looking for more of a mid to premium price point. And then you have to think about how you manage that with your selling price, because clearly your selling price is going to be higher if you're sourcing near shore. And we were talking about an example of a retailer that we worked with that kept buying the minimum order quantities, but there is no point in buying goods from a country where you are prepared to pay get a great in margin, which might be 70%, but actually you end up reducing most of that stock and selling most of it at 50% off. So we would always talk in our trading teams about the in margin, which is the margin you buy in, and very critically the out margin, which is the margin you actually have sold those goods. So that's where having a blended strategy of far and near shore will give you what we call a blended margin. So you may, for example, buy your core programs in China, and get real volume there and great margin, and that's fine. But your fashion product is likely to come from a nearer source, which allows you to repeat in season. So quite often, if you're buying big core programs, you can't repeat. And if you're buying fashion from China, you're going to struggle in season, particularly if it's something that is winter focused, so it's not a coat or a winter jumper. So if it's something that is going to have a time stamp on it, managing how you buy that and source that will be important, because otherwise you will end up A, with a lot of stock, and B, then with a lot of markdowns, which will have an impact on your profit. So it is all about having a strategy that suits your business and being agile. So the difficulty of the Red Sea, the difficulty of what's happening in a geopolitical way has had real impacts in terms of where you source. That doesn't mean you don't source where the country is the best, and China is one of the best countries to source cashmere from, and cashmere in terms of core volume is a great product, so you source where the best product is. But just having an awareness of what the consequences of where you source is going to have on your final profit, because as they say, sales are for vanity and profit is for sanity. So absolutely balancing your sourcing in that way. The other key thing that's going to have an impact on your profit margin that you deliver is how you physically get the product to your company. So the door-to-door way that you will get that product from either China, India, or wherever you choose to source it from. And the impact of how you can order that and how that is shipped to you will have a really big impact on your bottom line. There are many, many technical terms to do with ordering and shipping, but what I would say is make sure that you're very clear when you are sourcing with your supplier what your bottom line margin is, and that will include everything, including your shipping and possibly your duty and your custom rates. So in terms of Incoterms is the term that is used, but those are just the international commercial terms that are agreed. So being very clear when you are in the factory as to what your bottom line profit margin needs to be and cost needs to be, so you can then work out what your recommended retail price is very, very important. If you're unsure, there are lots of sources that you can get the information from. Hive will have great information that can help you, but also you can go to government agencies and government websites that will give you some information on what the Incoterms are. But a very, very important of what is your trading and how that will have an impact on your sales and your profit. We would always advise that you use the local currency and buy in the local currency, because you always get a better deal. We had many discussions in John Lewis about the fact that it is complicated enough to be a buyer without having to hedge currency in the middle of your sourcing trip. So we had teams who would do that for us. But what you don't want to be doing is watching fluctuating currency. So again, being really clear on what the foreign exchange rates are that you're buying on and where you have sourced that from, because that again will have a huge impact. If the currency is fluctuating, will have a huge impact on your margin. So making sure you're very, very clear before you leave as to what the cost price is and what it includes. Container fills, again, will also have a huge impact. So if you are not managing to meet the minimum order quantities, you will not be able to fill the containers, and the cost of the containers in COVID went crazy. As we said, it got very, very high. So that again will have a direct impact on your margin. So what I would do is make sure that you are very clear, possibly use a freight forwarder if you need help, use agents, use suppliers. We work with a brilliant new sourcing company from India called Sara, who have really amazing links with Maersk Shipping because they're a very big company, so they can give preferential rates on containers. But what they will also do is provide all the benefits of a sourcing office if you don't have one, and they will pool all the container product together. So you will share your container with other suppliers, and that means it keeps the cost down. So there are always different routes if you can't manage to fill containers to find a way to make it as efficient as possible, and there are sources to help you do that. The same with customs and duty rates. Be very clear what you're paying. Those change and fluctuate all the time. So the reason that people are sourcing in Turkey is because it's free trade, as well as having absolutely brilliant product. India are on the cusp of hopefully getting a free trade deal with the UK. So post the elections in this year, that the retailers are really hoping that that's going to happen, because that will make a significant difference. Geopolitical impacts may have an impact on what the rates are going to be from China, particularly if Trump gets in America and he's very anti-sourcing from China. You're also paying lots of dumping duty rates and other duties and tariffs. So just again, making sure that you have visibility of the information you need to make the most informed decision you can make, so that you're not throwing away margin on something that you hadn't thought of. In terms of responsible and sustainability, These are very hot topics, and we would all love if everyone would love to buy British, but getting the prices there is very, very difficult to achieve. So you have to source around the world. So it is doing it in the most responsible and sustainable way that you possibly can. And it's not as obvious as China is bad, Europe and the UK is good. There are some amazing factories in China and India, and they're very, very well aware of the need to be sustainable and responsible in the way that they trade. So being really clear with the factories that you deal with as to what are their trading responsible sourcing rules. And SEDEX is a great way of making sure that that is in place, and all of the Hive sourcing partners are all SEDEX approved. At John Lewis, we would not place an order with a factory unless it was SEDEX approved. So making sure that those are in place and that you are very clear that where you're sourcing, you've done everything you possibly can to make sure that it's the most responsible and sustainable place that you can source that product, regardless of where it is in the world. So thinking about carbon footprint, clearly there is an impact if you're sourcing in China or India more than Turkey or Portugal, but actually what you'll tend to find with a lot of companies that they will offset their carbon footprint. So the cost of getting those goods from that far shore to the UK, they will make a point of offsetting it, which helps people realise that they're trying to be responsible and sustainable where they can be. In terms of packaging, we spend a lot of time, you quite often spend more time on the packaging than the product in some cases, but the packaging is really important. You don't want to over-package the product because it's a huge part of your cost of goods as well. Making sure that it's FSC cardboard if it's being wrapped in a certain way, and making sure that it's not over-packaged. But again, managing it so that you package it sufficiently so that it doesn't get damaged. So for example, we bought Christmas trees in huge volume at John Lewis. We decided to take the plastic taping off it because it wasn't very sustainable and use something else instead, but it wasn't strong enough, so the trees got damaged. So you have to be very well aware in all of your sourcing and sustainability strategies that when you push a lever down here, it quite often pops up here. So just doing the best job you can to manage what the cost of doing business is for the world and how you can do it in the most responsible way. The same goes for your raw material sourcing. There are countries that are very well known for certain sources, cotton in Europe, but making sure that it's sustainable. Raffia that comes from Africa, but again, making sure bamboo very much is a very sustainable product. How is it growing? What's the impact on the local community? So again, making sure that the raw material sourcing is done in the most responsible way. And then factory standards. If you can get to the factories, that's great. You can get a real sense of how they are run, what the people are being treated like, what the factory environment is it safe, is it healthy? That's not always possible. So if you can't get to factories that are far shore, making sure that you have people or agents or suppliers who can do that for you. The company that we work with, Clara, have 1,000 agents, so they can actually go and manage all of these factories and actually investigate very small factories for you. If you have a sourcing office, clearly you will have that too. If not, make sure the agents who are supporting you are visiting those factories. And when you visit, don't tell the factories that you're coming always. It's quite often to visit them on spec. But also be aware that in certain parts of the world, there are different standards. We had a problem at John Lewis where they wouldn't wear the boots in the factory we're in, but it was really, really hot in this factory in India and they wanted to wear flip-flops. So it might seem like it's a safety problem, but actually you have to think about how the people live in those countries. But just taking those extra steps to making sure that people's welfare is being looked after. In terms of auditing, make sure the factories are audited, as I've said. No audit, no deal is what we always said in John Lewis. So making sure that those factories are SEDEX audited and you're very, very happy with how that factory is being run, and making sure the quality control is there. So again, this is really important, is to have real clarity of communication if you're out in India or China in particular, and making sure they're very clear on the quality you require. So your brief needs to be very clear, very specific, and make sure that they sample for you. So what you see in the factory is what you get. So make sure you get what we would call a red seal, which would be the first seal, and then a gold seal, which would be a final seal for a product. Because if you don't get that, you'll have a problem when the product comes in. And particularly if it's a seasonal product, you'll have no time to fix it when you come back. So making sure you're very clear on the quality that you require for that factory. And then making sure, as I say, that the labour standards are there. There are no children working. People are working fair hours for a fair wage, and that all of that is covered. Quite often we would look at the books and the wage books and make sure that people are being paid in a fair way. Being very mindful that obviously the wages are lower in India than they would be in China, but that it is a fair wage. And finally, the environment of the factory, making sure the environmental impact of the factory. And lots of factories do this really well. China have lots of factories where they use solar, they reuse water. We work with a number of Indian factories who reuse all of their water and regenerate it, and have solar panels, and don't use any dyes that are difficult, because the impact on the environment of dyeing is quite huge, particularly in textiles. So just making sure you have taken every step possible to make sure that you have visibility and transparency of how your sources are running their businesses.
So if you're lucky enough to be able to travel to do your overseas sourcing, there's some really key things that you need to think about before you go to get the most out of your trip. So firstly, making sure you've got the correct and relevant business visas. These can be quite a long, drawn-out process, maybe quite a lot of form filling. So make sure you've got the right ones in place. For instance, there might be nuances around the first time you travel to a country. So somewhere like China might give you quite a short visa with restrictions on how many times you can cross the border. So if you're going to base yourself in Hong Kong, for instance, you might need to consider this, because it can make your trip quite restrictive. So being clear on all of those things before you go will allow you to get the best out of your time. Then thinking about vaccinations and making sure you stay healthy whilst there. Lots of these regions will have things that you need to consider in terms of making sure you're going to stay healthy and get the right inoculations before you go. Also making sure you take things with you, such as a really good insect repellent, will just make your trip more comfortable, more enjoyable, and you don't want to lose time because you've had to stay behind in the hotel because you've become unwell. So really making sure you're well protected whilst you're there is key. And then spending time on creating an itinerary. So you might want to see lots of things, cover lots of things, but being realistic about where factories are located, how long travel times are, and factoring in that you need to kind of make sure that you've got the right trains or the right planes booked to get you across countries, which can be a lot bigger than we're used to, and local factors such as travel in cars in some of the cities in countries like India and China can take a really long time, a lot longer than you might be used to. So if you've factored all that in and you're ready to go, when you get there, it's really key to think about being in the moment. So again, it might feel quite obvious, but making sure you've got your out of office on, so that you're completely in the moment, you're really taking the time to build relationships with your factories and vendors, spending time looking at things in detail, questioning things, just understanding who you're going to be working with, because once you return home again and then working remotely, things like this become a lot more challenging. And if you can't travel, don't panic. Post-pandemic, most producers now have really brilliant virtual showrooms, and will spend time showing you around in more of a virtual way. So you're not going to miss out if you can't actually get there. And if you do make the trip, make sure you enjoy it. You'll see some amazing things, have some crazy experiences, and that will again really help you understand about sourcing in those regions and what cultural differences there might be, how people work in those parts of the world, and just what's going on for them in terms of climate and weather as well. You might get stuck in Hong Kong with a typhoon. All these things can happen, so really kind of take it all in and enjoy it. So hopefully we've covered some really useful tips and hints for you around starting your sourcing journey, and you'll be able to go on and really find some brilliant and exciting products to add into your business.